my mission statement that I think I was in some sort of conference as a college student. They said, hey, you got to have a mission statement. Oh, that's a good idea. And I boiled it down, and it was to defend truth and praise beauty. So, like, that's what I'm on this planet to do.
Liam Corley is an unusual, if not a rare individual. He is a scholar, poet, religious warrior. He is a man that embodies within himself identities and loyalties that many people would find contradictory, if not outright incompatible. I thought he would be an interesting person to talk to this 4th of July, a national holiday that elicits so many apparently conflicting feelings and beliefs in our divided society.
You're listening to a small good thing.
Good thing. Small good thing with Steve Zelt.
I'm Steve Zelt, and thanks for tuning in. It was the 4th of July a few weeks ago. It is a holiday that evokes different responses from different people. For some of us, maybe most of us, it is a day for parades, barbecues, and baseball games at the park, and watching fireworks at night. The 4th of July also calls forth the idea of freedom that has been gained to some degree by American military power, and so we celebrate men and women who have served or are serving now in the armed forces. The 4th of July also brings out strong religious feelings in some people, particularly the belief that America, more than any other country in the world, has had and still has a special relationship to God. And yet, there is a sizable group of people today that believe all this celebration of God and country should be called out as a sham and a shame because it papers over the historical sins of America, sins of injustice that still roll on today. Religion, the military, and the American past. How should we think about these realities? Is there any way at all that they can be reconciled intellectually, or is that an impossible dream? Liam Corley is a professor of early American literature at a state university, so he knows more than most about America's past, and at the same time, he has been an active member of the armed services, so that in 2008, at the beginning of his teaching career, he was deployed to Afghanistan as a lieutenant in the United States Navy Reserve. What's more, he is a man of faith who is, he says, compelled by the moral beauty of Jesus. And if all that isn't enough to cause a collision of values, he is a published poet, which is one way that he makes what he calls an aesthetic response to truth. He has written scholarly essays, poems, and stories on the connections between literature, the university world, and military life. Most recently, he was awarded a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Thanks for being on the show today, Dr. Corley.
Wow, Steve, thanks for the introduction.
Well, I want to begin by asking you how it is that you can be both a professor in the humanities, which is a division in colleges that generally hews towards the liberal progressive side of things and is vocally against the idea of making war, and yet at the same time you're a veteran who has been involved in the making of war. How do those two identities abide and function within yourself? How do you keep yourself glued together?
You know, I wish I could go back in time and talk to myself in high school and college. I tell all of my students now what I wish I could have heard then, which is that life has room for a lot of career paths, a lot of identities. We're not committing when we take our first job out of college to, a lifetime of moving that millstone around. And, I was raised by a Marine, and I'm third generation U.S. military. So I think the door to the military was open to me. I had a Marine ROTC scholarship when I was applying to my undergraduate programs. Ended up at UC Berkeley and realized pretty quick I could just work part-time and get the same amount of financial benefit and not owe anyone 4 years at the end of it. So although my dad never said how he felt about that when I declined that scholarship, I think he and I were both surprised when, a dozen or more years later, come 9/11, there was a change of heart, and I realized, well, is that path closed? At that point, I was already in a doctoral program, pursuing a degree in literature, and I knew whatever would happen, that I didn't want to give up an academic career, but I did feel that I couldn't stand by when a lot of people were serving in the military who had fewer options. And I don't believe a democracy's wars should be fought by its most impoverished or least advantaged citizens. That seems to me a sure recipe for frivolous wars. When those in the decision-making class aren't also in the sacrificing class. And also when the Abu Ghraib prison scandal was unfolding in Iraq and in the news, I think made me more conscious of the need for members of the military to have humility and accountability, and that the quality of leadership and oversight was really only going to be as good as the American citizens that went into it. We have tremendous power as a country. We have to use it in a way that is responsible and not authoritarian, totalitarian, or other ways exploitive.
Your dad was a Marine, but you opted for the Navy, is that right?
Yeah, I was too old for the Marine Corps by the time I saw the light. So, I love working with the Marines. I mean, obviously the Navy, we do it all the time. But no, I was 34, too old.
Yeah.
Liam Corley speaks complex truths in a deeply thoughtful and gentle way. He speaks of sacrifice, the necessity for the privilege to receive the benefits of the military to also bear the cost of those benefits in some way. He speaks of every American citizen's culpability in war, not just the soldiers. For him, there is no dividing line at all between the academy and the military, and he speaks with the authority of living experience.
As a member of a democratic society, we're entirely implicated by anything our government or military does, both the downsides of it and also the benefits. And our society is incredibly rich, but that comes on the backs of people around the world and workers in our own country in ways that we just tend to repress that knowledge. And the university is such a privileged place, incredibly subsidized by funds that come from all number of different locations. But, I mean, the fact of the matter is the government, state and federal, no matter whether it's a private institution or not, accounts for much of the research and the student financial aid support that makes it a viable institution. As such, it's inevitably tied to any national war. It just can't. You can't draw a line between them. And I figured, hey, I'm just conscious of it because I'm in uniform, but everybody else is just as implicated. In a democracy, there's nobody who stands aside. And I think that's where when people point out, oh, look at all these damaged veterans. The damaged veterans, and as sad and tragic as those things are merely an indication of wounds America has received. And I think instead of being spectators of that, the best citizen response is actually to acknowledge that same culpability. I have a poem in draft. The title is "Thank You for Sending Me," and it's I wouldn't call it bitter, but it's very self-aware that when someone thanks me for my service, it would be tactless to respond with, well, thank you for sending me.
Now, Liam, you are also a religious man. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. I've been an admirer of Jesus for decades, and I think have felt pursued by him, since a very young age.
And that would seem to add yet another conflicting and complicating component. How does your allegiance to God get along with your academic and military identities?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways in which they come together, especially as a literature guy. My mission statement that I think I was in some sort of conference as a college student. They said, "Hey, you got to have a mission statement." I thought, "Oh, that's a good idea." And I boiled it down and wrote it in the front cover of a Bible that I had at the time, which I still have. And it was to defend truth and praise beauty. So that's what I'm on this planet to do. The defense was an intellectual defense, that it was because truth, only needs to be burnished to be accepted by others. It only needs to shine, to twinkle, as Emily Dickinson said. It has to dazzle gradually, or it makes people blind or bludgeoned, depending on whose hands are using it. Beauty, I think of, just praise of it, and really what's winsome about that is the example of someone's joy and abandon in relationship to whatever it is that is giving joy. And this relates to how I am in terms of the fact that I'm so compelled by moral beauty. And what I see in Jesus' life is an example of someone who saw both the misery but also the evil complicity of a group of people, and he chose not to hold himself apart from it, but to get engaged and participate in that society. You're right that there are things that are incompatible, but I think it's Khalil Gibran in the Prophet says we're not higher than the best someone in our country can accomplish, and we're not lower than the worst that any criminal has committed. And when I read Dostoevsky, say the Brothers of Karamazov, and I see the priest novitiate Alyosha always apologizing for himself when everybody else thinks he's a saint, I recognize that just like Daniel prayed in Babylon, that we identify with the failings of our country and society, because we're not above them. And that through that, we also can achieve or aspire to the highest ideals. And so I don't think being a member of the military and a member of the academy are incompatible. They are vocations that speak to each other, that give each other vocabulary to explain why it is so important that we defend truth, and why it is so important that we invest time to praise the beauty that we're capable of as well.
According to a 2015 survey, even though the United States Constitution makes no mention of God, 53% of Americans say they believe God and the nation have a special relationship. That's a concept that stretches back to the Pilgrim days. What's more, 1/3 of atheists, agnostics, and those with no religious preference believe America has a special relationship with God. One thing the survey noted that is not surprising is that the more formal education a person has, the less likely that person is to believe America and God are tightly intertwined. Only 29% of the people who have a graduate degree think so. And that's compared to 66% of those with a high school degree or less. I live in a military town. There are always 6 or 7 parking spaces reserved for veterans only at the Home Depot and the fitness place I go to. At the community college I teach at, a substantial minority of my students each quarter are there specifically as veterans. I attend a large church in the area. I like the church. I think it's a good church filled with good people. Every 4th of July, they have a special evening service that is filled with music that is both patriotic and Christian. At some point in the program, they have an honor guard composed of representatives of the 5 branches of the service come down front and hold the flag as the congregation and choir sings together, God Bless America. I sang in that choir last year, but I didn't sing in it this year. It's hard to say exactly why, but I have mixed feelings about mixing Christianity and America. I think it can send the wrong message, maybe even an unbiblical message if you can accept that kind of language. I know that I'm not alone in this feeling, but I have the feeling I'm in the minority. I asked Dr. Corley what his thoughts were about all this and what he might say to Christians specifically about the idea of having a special relationship between God and America.
I hear that expression of ambivalence about the ways in which God and country get mixed inside of not just the American church. I mean, it's the case in a number of different religious traditions in a number of different countries. The confluence of those two all-consuming allegiances. And so it's simpler to have them in agreement. I think that there is a call from a creator God who at the Tower of Babel instituted the types of differences that lead to cultural and national diversity. So at the outset, I think we might argue over which country is the deity's favorite country. But if the deity is the kind of loving deity as depicted in the Bible, every child feels like a special child. That said, for most of the national history of Israel and for the New Testament existence of the followers of Jesus, they experienced statelessness, or rather sort of being under someone else's state. And so the idea of being apart from a society that they're planted in is pretty central. And yet in that, the deity of the Israelites said, hey, pray for Babylon, for the city that conquered you. You're living there now. So I think that the way I see it is we should love what God has made, and we have been placed in a country in the United States which has a unique and delightful history of empowering people to pursue truth as their conscience reveals it to them. And that's been a tremendous gift to the world, both in terms of moral awareness and human possibility. We also have a complicity in the sad story of evil, and we have to be aware and listen to that as well, because no country figured it out. No. The example I talked about why I find Jesus so beautiful and compelling is that he was pretty wide-eyed about the evil that went on under his name in Israel when he came to the earth. And I feel like in my own life, knowing the highs and lows of our national history is a lot easier as someone who knows failure is the first step towards working for justice. That forgiveness is what allows a person to take the next step, to acknowledge the truth of, yeah, I'm part of a people who did wrong. Maybe I did some of that wrong. But the truth is that addressing the darker chapters, which are still unfolding in our country, is the only way for what is good about our heritage to have any meaning at all. And I think Christians to look at the beginning of the country as old ways and already engaged in a compromise between secular and religious voices, between voices that want to ignore issues of justice and pursuit of wealth and success versus, voices of repentance and pursuit of righteousness. I think for a Christian to look at that mixed heritage, there's a lot less flag waving and a lot more soul searching.
I also asked Dr. Corley what he might say to the non-religious person. What are some things that they might contemplate when they think of their relationship to America?
That's a harder one. I think if we ever speak in a prophetic voice, we need to speak to our own tribe. And I'm not a secular person. I live in that world. But the question I raise to students, and maybe which is appropriate here, is what is worth dying for? Is anything worth dying for? Because people don't find it very attractive, someone who only wants to save their own skin, who will betray, abandon, and feather their own nest at the cost of others. That's something that the revolutionary generation knew some things were worth fighting for and dying for, and this principle of individual liberty. Those are things that are the kinds of values that require convictions. And those convictions need some sort of support that sacrifice, even up to the point of life, is worthwhile. And so I think it's difficult for someone who doesn't have a sense of justice being something worked out over time by a benevolent deity to rationalize sacrifice. It's really hard to do. And so I'd just say, hey, what is worth it? Think that through. Because I think our aesthetic response to cowardice and self-serving behavior, our aesthetic response of revulsion, is a testimony that those virtues require maybe a broader worldview than mere secularism can provide.
We didn't get a chance to talk about Liam Corley's vocation as a poet, so I asked him to close the show by reading a poem of his that was recently published. A poem, I think, that brings together and expresses, and maybe better than any other form, the way his various identities and allegiances push and pull against one another in a living, vital way.
A veteran considers submission and thinks of Ginsberg, by Liam Corley. America, I've given you all, and now I'm less than 1%. America, 14.675 years of service I can't characterize as other than honorable. 391 days, pounding dirt in other people's countries, and 117 sleepless nights per annum in perpetuity. September 11th, 2017. America, I'm willing to renegotiate our social contract. I won't complain about the clean bill of health charged against me by the VA, and you can stop involuntarily mobilizing memes of my demise in support of indecent campaigns. America, believe me when I say I'm not dead broke. I ain't so straight. I'm not all white, and I don't love hate. America, when will you realize we are peopled with 2.5 times more African Americans than veterans, discounting 3 million souls in both tribes? Here, I incorporate them all, the ones hunted and penned in an inglorious spot, survivors whose lives matter, because we both know the wary grief of looking at a uniform we paid for and wondering whom the man beneath has sworn to protect and defend. America, into this veteran poem, I will take all the graduates of Columbine and Sandy Hook, the ones who lived after having no answers for the warm muzzle of a gun, and their teachers, especially the ones who ran toward shots. The hall of the American Legion will overflow with such heroes, streaming like the blessed dead of Fort Hood and Chattanooga across the Styx and Charon's commandeered craft, the open door of welcome forced, as always, by warriors still living. America, let's rent a cherry picker to take down the F in the VFW sign. Let what is removed drop horribly in the pail. Police will gather in their surplus riot gear and nod in an understanding fashion, their years of service trailing them like a sentence, arming them with arcane questions of whether civilians we protected yesterday will kill us today. America, out of the sands of Kandahar and Ramadi, I go with them too. Furthermore, America, in this election season, I go with righteous immigrants and refugees, fellow sufferers of long journeys and inhumane transports that leave them in permanent pain. Oh, my desperate ones, border crossers of unwilling countries, you who pay taxes of sweat and fear, you are not alien to me, or my 35,000 brother and sister dreamers in green and khaki, fighting for something that isn't wholly ours, in dangerous places where we simply do our jobs. America, when will you give cyber purple hearts to all who have had their lives taken out of your senile digital grip, starting with the 24 million whose secrets you've let slip into China's voracious panda pocket? We shall update and tweet ourselves feverish with the chant, Uncle Sam is my big brother, in protest of all those Xis and Putins and Snowdens and Kims and transnational criminal elements stealing our binary essence. I'm not joking, America. I foresee the day when every iPhone will be issued with a trauma kit, every laptop with a liability release for unauthorized remote access. Oh, America, my love, my burial plot. All this I will put in a phantom poem, my own republic, for you to receive, a sea bag of sights unseen, to tumble down the ramp of a decommissioned C-130, this empty box, this absent limb.
I hope that you found some small good thing in this show, something that encouraged you or maybe made you think differently about something in a new way. You can look in the show notes for a link to Liam Corley's website along with other links to his essays and poetry. You will also find a link to our webpage, A Small Good Thing, where you can send me any comments you might have about the show. In the next episode, in 2 weeks, I talk with Larry Enriquez and his experiences helping people get through the grief of being left behind by someone close to them who has committed suicide. Thanks for listening.